Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. This is an interesting week to be doing a book event right before Thanksgiving. I talked to a British author today, and she said somebody had wished her a happy holiday, and she thought, it's not till December. So, but Thanksgiving is really a uniquely, well, not uniquely because Canada has one, but it's a special American holiday. So thank you all for coming out this evening to celebrate it, and to Jack DuBrul, who is joining us tonight on a interesting week to fly into Phoenix to talk about Clive Cussler's The Sea Wolves. Ooh, that's a great title, Jack. You have to hold this up.
That actually wasn't my original title. They changed it on me. It was Wolfpack. The book just came out earlier in the year with the same title, so we had to change it up.
Got it. And so, didn't the Germans actually call themselves something like wolves?
Yeah, it was the Wolfpack, or they called them Wolfpacks. That's how they hunted the submarines.
Right. So all together,
it still worked.
It does. So what we have here is, you tell it. It's your book. Hi. So we have Isaac Bell.
Yes. Without giving too much away, I was working on the Saboteurs. I was trying to think of ideas for the next book, and I look at historical events of what's going on at roughly that time. And, of course, the sinking of the Lusitania was one of the triggers that got us into World War I. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to have Isaac Bell on the Lusitania when it sank? But that really wasn't a good enough hook. So then my idea was, well, then Isaac Bell was the reasons the Germans had to sink it. And that's how the plot started, or that's how the book will end. But that's the genesis of the whole plot idea. And it was a lot of fun to work with.
It is. It's a lot of fun to read it. And there's not only submarines and other stuff, but there's some serious aviation things in it, which I really, really enjoyed. Because we're not that far away from the right, but we're in 1915.
Yeah, it's only 12 years.
Yeah.
But it was all that stuff was all still brand new.
But it's astonishing. There's a whole thing at one point about how to fuel a plane sufficiently to let it fly out and try to intercept a ship. And, you can't even imagine that when the Wright brothers were like running on the beach in Kitty Hawk.
Right.
Yep. There's a photo in a book I just showed you in the back about the Wright brothers and their airplane, which had a kind of a dimple effect on the wings, which helped them fly it. But clearly by the time you're writing, we're much more sophisticated in design and construction, aren't we?
Yeah, their wings actually flexed to get more lift. And again, by the teens, they had the rigid wing. They knew how to make it work much better. And they're starting to experiment with monoplanes versus biplanes.
Yeah. Yeah, I love all that. Yeah. Right. And we're, like flying out from Long Island and trying to go into the North Atlantic. But we'll get to that. But, with the war in the Ukraine going on, I think it's interesting to think that in both world wars, America did not want to join up and fight.
No.
I was born in 1940, so, I was a child during the war. But you would think, as an historian, that I knew this. But I just assumed that after Pearl Harbor, that we declared war on Germany. But no, we didn't. In fact, Hitler declared war on us, which is considered one of his major blunders.
Yeah.
Because if he hadn't, it's not entirely clear that Roosevelt could have pushed us into fighting in Europe
theater
as well. Japan was already, gone thing. But the drag in the First World War in that time, because it began in the summer of 1914, and the United States didn't enter the war till 1917. So you're in a territory where there's both pro-war and serious anti-war sentiment.
The country was heavily divided, and especially Wilson, as a lifelong pacifist, wanted nothing to do with the war at all. And the drag against the United States, for both the Allies and the Axis powers to get us involved was tremendous. And we still had a great relationship with Britain the way we do now, and so again, a lot of people we should be helping them out. But what can we do to maintain the strict neutrality that we had to have? So it was a very tight balance.
It really was. And the other sort of Jules Verne thing going on there is that the Germans had developed submarines. And the whole idea of, undersea war and torpedoes and all of that was pretty new.
And then they had what they called unrestricted submarine warfare, which any ship in the Atlantic was fair game. At the beginning of the war, it was just a tight box around England that they would hit vessels, and even then only British flagged vessels, or Allied, I think the French too. But then it was during, I think, the beginning of 1915 that the Germans said, no, any ship in the war zone is fair game. So that's when they started shooting. That's when, well, of course, listening was British, but I forget the first American ship that was torpedoed. Like 124 Americans were killed. And again, people were clamoring, to Wilson, look, the Germans are killing our people, get us involved. And Wilson still wouldn't do it.
It's interesting that Wilson was not really the right president to be a wartime president, or as it turned out, because of his health, because he had a stroke and his wife took over running the White House for quite a while. His second wife, who was an interesting character in herself, he wasn't even the right president for the peace, because the Treaty of Versailles, which directly led us into World War II, a different president, I think, would have, but we're getting ahead of ourselves, would have made that a different outcome. Whereas in World War II, Roosevelt really wanted to get us into war, and he and Churchill flirted around with that for a long time. So they were very
long
different.
Before Pearl Harbor, the Lend-Lease and all that.
Yep. So if Isaac Bell survives to, go all the way up to 1939 or 40, which is not improbable.
No.
There's plenty of interesting things to write about. So Isaac Bell, all Cussler adventures have serious history in them, right? I mean, it's been one of the great things about reading Clive is that, and the other authors, is that you get to learn really cool stuff about history and places that you might not know about. But Isaac Bell, he's the only actual, all the way through, historical figure, right?
That's why when Clive asked me to do an Isaac Bell book, and I came up with the Titanic Secret, I wanted to flip that classic Cussler, twist upside down. So the book actually starts today, and then jumps back into the history. But yeah, he's the only character that is full historic.
And I'm trying to remember, because Justin Scott wrote the original ones. When did he start? Do you guys remember? I mean, I don't mean when did Justin start writing them. I'm sorry. What I meant was, where was Isaac Bell on the time spectrum? Do any of you remember where the...
Well, the one Clive did was the San Francisco earthquake of 1906.
Okay. All right.
And then I know Justin set one prior to that to be kind of like Isaac's first
a bit
case.
of a prequel?
Yep. And then the last one, chronologically at least, was the Bootleggers, which was 1920. So that whole span was kind of fair game.
So if it was 1920, you went back a bit.
I went back a bit, yes. Yeah, because again, when I came up with the idea of the Titanic Secret, it was like, well, we got to go back to 1912. But Justin never kept anything chronological. He jumped around as well. So it's so far worked out, I'm staying chronological, just how my brain works.
Well, I mean, it's a really interesting time period.
It is. Yeah, because again, you can play around with German spies and saboteurs, and I mean, there were cases of Germans spying and being saboteurs in the United States.
Absolutely.
There's a dock fire in New Jersey, and then something off the coast of California. I forget what it was. I was looking into that as well. There's
a book that we did an event for at the end of September by Susan Elia McNeil called Mother, Daughter, Traitor, Spy. And it's set in Los Angeles in the early 1940, I think it is, or 30. Anyway, there's a whole German spy ring in Los Angeles, German sympathizers, and they actually built Hitler a West Coast White House. I mean, actually did that. Yeah, I know. I was completely fascinated with the historical, and there were indeed German plots too. We're going to be talking to Brad Meltzer in January. I'm trying to remember the second Sunday in January.
God, he's a great guy.
And it's about a Nazi plot to kill Roosevelt. So there were active German spies and terrorists and saboteurs and so forth in the United States in both wars.
Both wars.
Yep. I mean, we think about the Japanese internment, but in truth, the German populations were probably more dangerous than the West Coast Japanese ever were.
Interesting. I love doing the historic books because it's humbling to know how much you don't know.
Absolutely.
When you start looking into things. It's like, whoa, I had no idea that's how that worked or whatever it was.
So when you were plotting out this book, you're going to end with the Lusitania.
Yes.
But you have to have an original instigating incident. I love that phrase, instigating incident. It just cracks me up. So we actually are in French Guiana, And you've all heard of Devil's Island, I'm sure, the infamous prison. But it wasn't, according to your research.
No.
Devil's Island was actually not the infamous
Was not
prison.
the infamous. That was actually for political prisoners, like Dreyfus. Rene Dreyfus was there. There's I can't remember the name of the island. There was 3 islands in the chain. It was the other one that was the solitary confinement, was the real bad place. But Devil's Island just sounds so great for a story. But then again, the entire coast of Guyana was all part of the penal system, which I had no idea. The French were sending all their prisoners over there, basically as slave labor, to turn Guyana into a successful colony, which failed miserably.
Yeah, but the French still actually have some overseas colonies. They have Réunion in the Indian Ocean. My husband and I went to French Polynesia. You think of it as Tahiti, but it's just one of several islands.
Mm-hmm.
We were there last May. It's still an active French colony, and I think French Guiana is still.
I believe you're right.
I think it is.
I think it is.
Yeah, but anyway, your scenes, the opening scenes of this thing, are basically a prison break. So I'm not spoiling anything because that's how it starts. That's really, the scenes that you set there are so horrible. How did you research the way these guys were treated?
The
Or did you
internet,
just
like
make it
everybody
up?
else. No, it's pretty close to what they did, and I saw a bunch of videos of the buildings themselves, what they looked like, and how just stark they were, and just the brutality of they talk about the sentencing. If you're sentenced to solitary confinement, it's 6 months. You're not allowed to speak for 6 months. There's no cover over your cell. So when it rains, you got hurricanes, you got whatever, the beating down sun. Again, they said that most of the guys that survived it were literally insane because of the treatment. Yeah.
I can well imagine it, not to mention the insects. I mean, it's a horrible, almost like the Everglades or something. And, probably snakes.
Oh,
just awful.
And diseases, typhus, malaria, whatever.
Malaria.
Yeah.
I know. Malaria was an astonishing killer for centuries.
Yes.
Millennia, actually.
Yeah.
I don't know that we actually realized just how lethal malaria was.
Killed more humans than anything else in history.
It has. And I think recently I read that they're coming up with a treatment. There's been a vaccine available. Last time that I had to take it, I had to take it when we went to Myanmar. I had to take it in Asia, and then I had to take it in South Africa. And I got so sick from I'm trying to remember what it's called.
I know. That headache you got 2 days after you took the pill. I know exactly what you're talking about.
I finally said, unless I'm eligible for the vaccine, I am done with going to the malaria parts of the world. But rightly, they are keeping the vaccine for people who really live there, and not for tourists like me. But even though you didn't want to take the drug,
you had to. Yeah.
The consequences of having malaria were so horrendous.
Yeah.
And the French, I'm trying to remember when they dug the Panama Canal, because that's a Clive book, isn't there? Was there, which one of the Cussler where we're down digging out the Panama Canal?
Saboteurs. My previous
book. Okay. But malaria was a real...
Oh, yeah. Killed 40,000 people.
Right.
On their first attempt.
Was it yellow fever, too?
Mostly malaria. Some yellow fever, yeah.
Right.
But yeah, it was just... when we went in for our attempt, we didn't dig anything for about 2 years until we drained all the swampland. So we would have that mass death the way that the French did.
Yeah. Well, I mean, New Orleans suffered from that. New Orleans.
Washington, D.C. suffered from that.
Terrible because it's a swamp.
Yeah.
Still is a swamp. He didn't drain the swamp. Literally did not drain the swamp. Anyway, so we have a prison break, but it turns out that what we have is one German agent is in there to bust out an even more dangerous German agent. So I thought that was an interesting way for you to start it, because you think you were going to be springing somebody that was going to be a good guy, but you're actually springing the really worst guy. Yep. And what thrillers really depend on the villain. A really great thriller depends on how good the villain is. So you right from the beginning, you give us this astonishing villain.
Well, it's actually
2 of them.
Yeah. Well, Clive gave us one of them. I'll take it.
Oh, did he?
Yeah. Foss Gley was one of the villains in what was the book? Cyclops. So this is actually Foss Gley's his grandfather is just as bad as Did you know what I did with Titanic Secret? I've got 5 characters in there are the grandparents of people from Clive's later books. just
I didn't
as
realize
Easter
it was
eggs.
that many.
Yeah.
Well, what fun.
Yep. Why not?
Absolutely. I love Easter eggs. Do you guys like Easter eggs? Isn't that fun to recognize? I'm assuming most of you here have probably read all the Cusslers. Not all, some. Right.
There's 80 of them, 82 right now. So
I know, but some of you have been reading them in real time. I read them in real time since 1990, I think it is. But yeah, but it's a lot of books.
yeah.
But what fun for you to
Oh,
to
it was a
do that.
blast. It was just finding ways to sneak them in there.
So anyway, we have this is mostly naval. This is mostly maritime, this book. And there's some
Yes.
scenes on land and
Yep.
there's some in the air, which are
Yep.
great, but more or less. So part of the break, because it's an island, is they have to like row in there and row away from it and, do all that great stuff to get away from the guards. So how did you, do you see this stuff when you're writing it? How do you do that?
I see the pictures and just describe what I'm seeing. That's how my imagination works.
Yeah.
So I could see, when I came up with the whole scene, I've got, guys rowing to shores. I can see, is that what's the weather like? Was it hot? Is it windy, choppy? And to start describing, okay, well, they get into the jungle. It's pitch black. Okay, it's, and then you can't hear the waves as much anymore. I kind of put that in there. Just keep layering details in as I see them.
Isn't there a vicious tide? Do I remember that
Yes,
there?
absolutely.
So part of
Yes.
the problem with
Yeah.
the rescue boat is that the tide might do them in.
Yeah. And that's actually what kept the prisoners there. On some of the islands where they were the political prisoners, there's no guards there. There's no, they weren't chained or anything, because again, you couldn't get off this island because of the currents, and B, whoever died there, they threw the bodies into the.
But trained the sharks.
Yeah.
The sharks got used to the bell ringing and they thought, oh, good lunch,
Yeah.
and so there they were. So you all know where this is? It's on the shoulder of South America, or just off the, the shoulders. You're coming around from, what is it, Venezuela to Brazil?
Yeah.
Those little islands out there. The French were kind of, they lost Canada, but they wanted to keep a toehold in this hemisphere, and so they hung on to this little part. They also, I don't know if you could ever use this, but there are 2 islands off the coast of, trying to remember which part of Canada. Anyway, Saint-Pierre-et-Miquelon are actually part of Brittany, but they are right off the Canadian coast.
Really?
So
They're French territory?
I'm giving you this as a gift for your next book. Do you all know this story?
No.
It's fabulous. So Saint-Pierre-et-Miquelon actually had its own archbishop. There are 2 little islands. I'm trying to remember exactly which part of Canada they're off. But whatever it is, because they were French, during Prohibition, there was no law that said that Seagrams, I think it is, in Canada, aren't they the big liquor? Seagrams could sell liquor to Saint-Pierre-et-Miquelon because basically they were selling it to France. And Joe Kennedy would send boats up to Saint-Pierre-et-Miquelon, where he bought the Seagrams liquor, which they couldn't sell to him if he were in Boston, and he did a whole rum running thing all the way down to Boston. And the thing I love the most is the only time I've ever been there, which was off a cruise ship. These are 2 relatively barren islands. It's not like heavily forested or anything. The entire place is full of wooden houses. I mean, it looks as though somehow they were right off Seattle or something.
Really?
And I thought, that can't be right. There's nothing here. How do they build these wooden houses? So I asked. And what happened was the liquor came from Seagrams in wooden cases, and Kennedy broke them all up in order to put the booze on his boats to run him down to Boston, and he left all the wood ashore, and so they scavenged it and they used it for building materials. I mean, the evidence is right there in front of you. That's what's so interesting. Yeah, I loved it. So
that's neat. I never knew that.
So if you're writing your way into the 1930s, I'm making you a gift of Saint-Pierre and Miquelon, which to this day are indeed part of the French province of Brittany. Wow. So French is the official language. They're not Canadian, even though they're right.
Wow.
Right
interesting.
There. Yep. So, but French Guiana, my point was that they kept it because it was their last kind of
their toehold in the Americas.
Exactly. Yeah, but using it as a penal colony, I've always thought was really fascinating. It was later than Napoleon, because they didn't use very good judgment to put Napoleon on Elba.
Right.
It was a little too close. And then St. Helena is off the coast of Africa.
Yes.
So, but I think I've always been a little curious about why they didn't send him, but maybe they didn't have it there to French Guiana.
I don't think it was during his time. They hadn't started.
Maybe not.
I think it was like the 1850s when they started.
Maybe, yeah. It would make sense because you would have thought otherwise Devil's Island would kind of hold up its hand and say, here we are. So anyway, you stage the prison break, and astonishingly, they get away. And so then we come up on Isaac Bell. But you experienced readers know that the guys that got out of prison are going to come back, right? Otherwise, why do we even have the prison break?
Check off villains.
Yep. Right. So what is Isaac doing? I mean, what's his current job?
Right now, Isaac is overseeing the transfer of some rifles from the Springfield Armory to the British at the day World War I is declared. And they have to kind of a way of fudging the legality of it so the weapons can be sent off and not interfere with the U.S. neutrality. But in the process, he discovers that the rifles in one of the cases has been removed, and inside is a radio transmitter, and figures out that basically it's a way for the submarines to hone in on that one particular ship. And so he realizes that they're German spies operating in America. And that's what sends him off and running.
Which German spies would they be, right? Yep. No, I thought you did that so well. Basically, they were Winchester rifles, right? But they had to be sold to Springfield in order to.
Yes, well, there were Army weapons. I can't even remember how it worked out now. That the U.S. Army rejected, so Springfield had to take back, and then they could legally sell them to the Brits.
Right. Without violating
our
very strict American neutrality. So there were going to be 3 loads of them.
Yeah,
and one ship has already sailed off.
Yep. And this would be the second ship. And I'll give one last detail away, then it's it. But as they're loading up these rifles, that first ship that went out was sunk by a German submarine.
Right.
So those rifles were lost.
And Isaac, for reasons we won't go into, begins to think that there's some stuff going on, and he realizes that the guy was not trying to steal the rifles, but rather insert something into the packaging for the rifles, and what would it be? So, there were really active German sympathizers and saboteurs. So where are we? We are somewhere on the East Coast.
This book mostly takes place around New York City and New Jersey and Long Island.
Okay. So when Isaac has to chase down a ship where he thinks that one of the transmitters is on board in one of the pilfered rifle cases, he summons up his friend Vanderbilt.
Yes.
So tell us about Vanderbilt, because he's very cool.
Oh gosh, I'm trying to think of which one he was. His first name. Yeah, he was a real character, international playboy. He was the one who created the Long Island Expressway as a toll road, basically just so he could go fast.
Why not if you're a Vanderbilt?
He was also the founder of the Vanderbilt Cup for car racing.
Right.
He was an avid yachtsman, pilot. He would have been someone that Isaac Bell would have been friends with, so they are friends. And from Vanderbilt, Bell borrows a Curtiss seaplane, and to go off to rescue the ship. But he's a fascinating character. And actually, his cousin was aboard the Lusitania when it was torpedoed and didn't make it.
Wow. Well, I think he's a wonderful character, but I was really intrigued by the Curtiss seaplane. I mean, as I say, it's so close to the Wright brothers, and here's this amazing plane that they're talking about fuel stops, and it's.
Well, that plane was built to fly the Atlantic.
I know, but
long before
Lindbergh.
Yeah,
I know. I didn't even think about that.
But with the war going on, they scrapped the whole plan. That's why that plane was built.
Lindbergh didn't fly until the late 1920s.
Yes,
so how come the Curtiss didn't come back?
I don't know.
The war was over in 1918.
Money, maybe? I don't know.
Oh, I mean, that's like a decade when they could have been flying the Atlantic. So
who knows?
Actually, Lindbergh's good luck in a way that it didn't work out. But I was also surprised that it could take on enough fuel to actually fly the Atlantic, you know. I mean, because even now, Stuart Wood's my Bible on, you know, flying back and forth across the Atlantic in his, it's the Beechcraft. Do I have that right? Is that I think it's Beechcraft makes the really sort of fancy private planes. Anyway, they had to stop and refuel somewhere in Newfoundland or Gander or some such place, you know, to even make it across the Atlantic. And here in your book, you know, they're going to pumping it in here in Long Island, and they're going to make it all the way across. And I thought, really?
It's a big plane.
Yeah, but it can't have been that heavy if it could take on enough fuel. I mean, because isn't the weight part of the reason the fuel burns so fast?
Right.
So it wasn't going to be a particularly safe plane to fly across the Atlantic.
Absolutely not.
You know, it was more like, you know, cardboard and matchsticks and other stuff. Anyway, so there's some great airplane stuff in the book, which I really liked. And that's about all we should probably say about it. I mean, we all know that the Lusitania sank, so, you know, it's not a spoiler to say that it went down, but how it goes down and the people on it and so
forth. And what happens to who's on it?
It went off, I mean, when they were rescued, they were really close to Ireland, right?
Only about 6 miles off the coast.
Right.
It wasn't that far. But
so how come the Germans let it get so close to Ireland where people, I mean, fewer people were going to die if it was 6 miles?
They really were looking for deaths per se. They just wanted for the captains to sink tonnage is what mattered to them.
Oh, okay.
But it just happened to be the submarine is at the right place at the right time, or wrong depending on how you want to look at it. It was coming, I think it was at the end of a patrol when they saw a large ship come out of a fog bank. And so they stopped and waited to see what it was. As they got closer and closer, they realized it was a British flag ship. So they took one shot, and that was it. And the Lusitania went down in like 19 minutes.
But not everybody died. See, that's another misassumption that I had all these years. I thought everybody died on the Lusitania, but a surprising number of them survived.
Yeah, I think about 500 survivors. The water was cold, but not like the night the Titanic went down.
Right.
And then there was nearby villages that saw what happened. And so they got boats out as fast as they could. Of course, a lot of them were sailboats. It still took them 20, 25, 30 minutes to get out there. But yeah, so they were managed to save a lot of people.
But since it was after the Titanic, did the Lusitania actually have something approaching real lifeboats
they had real lifeboats, but again, like with the Titanic, it got hit in the side and it starts to list. Okay. And once it starts to list, the boats on the upper side you can't get them down. And then the boats on the lower side, once they're going too far away from the hull, you can't get into them. So again, with only 20 minutes, I mean, just to launch them, to even know what's going on, you've already lost 7 or 8 minutes before you even think about launching lifeboats. And so there's just no time.
Do you remember when that Italian liner went aground a few years ago somewhere off? I don't remember. The captain was. Yeah. And didn't they have a problem with lifeboats too?
Well, yeah, the captain took the first one. There was a problem there.
Well, yeah, even the captain was the problem, as I remember it all the way through. But don't I recall that
I think they
also had a problem?
They had trouble with them as well.
Right, and yet if any of you have taken any kind of a cruise and all, they won't even sail until everybody on board has been through a lifeboat drill. I mean, I've been through more lifeboat drills than I can believe. Even sailing down the Mississippi, which I did in September, which I absolutely love, the upper Mississippi. Do you all know that there are locks on the upper Mississippi? Mm-hmm. And why would you think there would be locks on the upper Mississippi?
Why would I think? I just know there are.
But what would you assume would be the purpose? This is a trick question.
Because the water gets too shallow.
It's not because they have to keep a 9-foot deep channel on the upper Mississippi for the commercial traffic, the barge traffic and everything to flow. So the Army Corps of Engineers in the 30s, they constructed this interesting spillway dam sort of thing and a lock system. And it's just there to keep the 9-foot channel. It's not there for flood control or other things. I mean, it didn't even occur to me there were locks on the upper Mississippi. So the first one we sailed into, I thought there are 27 of them between Minneapolis and St. Louis. And then because up until recently, there was enough water from the Ohio and the Missouri coming into the Mississippi that they thought they didn't need to worry about the river being too shallow, which has been, blasted this fall. So the upper Mississippi, with fewer rivers coming in, it actually is more navigable at the moment than the lower Mississippi because they don't have locks and everything else. But anyway, they make you do a lifeboat drill just to go down the Mississippi. When in theory, I remember going down the Yangtze River in a riverboat years ago, and they said they weren't going to do a lifeboat drill. We all kind of looked. They said the river's so shallow. They said if the boat goes down, you just have to go up on the upper deck.
You're fine.
You'll be fine. You just stand there, until you're rescued. And I thought, okay. But anyway, it was the Titanic that actually prompted the idea of real lifeboats and real drills and everything,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah, yeah. They had a lot of standards put in place. But, again, a situation like that, there's the fear and the panic, even though you've done a lifeboat drill now, in today's world, after having to step across, say you're in a cruise ship, you're 80 feet above the water. You're stepping across that gap into the boat. So a lot of people can just stop, panic right there.
Right.
So in theory, the lifeboat drills are a good idea. It tells you where to go. But I don't know how efficient it would be to get the people into the boats and the boats off. Don't know.
I don't know either.
Yeah.
I mean, in theory, also GPS would help,
Not hit the rocks there in Italy.
Well, or help rescue operations arrive sooner than, the Carpathia just happened to be there, but it wasn't like it was actually sailing to save the Titanic. It was just there.
In right place, right time.
And then that happened with the Andrea Doria, too. Do you all remember that in the 50s? There was an Italian sank off New York or Long Island or something. There was a serious loss of life there, too.
Yeah, it was hit by a ship called the Stockholm.
Yeah.
Knifed into her side, yeah. I think it's off the coast, one of the Carolinas, I think. Maybe New Jersey.
No, I was going to say it was further north, than the Carolinas.
Okay.
I think New Jersey might be right.
I heard a story that actually one guy fell asleep in his cabin on the Andrea Doria when the Stockholm hit and then pulled back away. He was actually pulled onto the Stockholm and survived. Yeah.
Wow. The fickle finger of fate.
Right.
There it is. I love it. All right. So anyway, that's about all we can really say about the book. Do you guys have questions that you would like to ask? Bottled up questions? Come on.
Yes.
Okay.
Day to day, procrastinate until about 2:00, then panic. It's been different every book. This last book, doing the Sea Wolves, for whatever reason, the first time in my career, I disciplined myself to write about 2.5 hours every day, 7 days a week, until the book was done. Other books, I won't write for a few weeks, and then I'll panic and write a lot over the course of the 3 or 4 days. So I've really, I wish I was more professional about my profession, but I'm not. It's just when the mood strikes, so I'm working on the new Clive, new Isaac Bell book now and trying to, again, force myself to that discipline. But I'm finding I'm slipping, I'm missing a day here, missing a day. It's like, Jack, get back, get into the computer. It just, so it's a mess. It really is a mess.
When you were writing your own books, because Jack has published, a number of books outside the Cussler verse, was it the same process?
Pretty much.
Did you always been like that?
Yeah. It's either feast or famine for me with writing. It was.
So how did Clive recruit you to write for Clive at all?
How did he recruit me?
Yeah, you're the one author which I had nothing to do with, so to speak. So I've always been kind of curious.
I was having the worst day of my life. It was not long after my mom had passed away. My dad's estate was going through like the worst audit my lawyer had ever seen. My mom's cat that we're taking care of had run away. It was a mess. And I was running some errands. I got back home, and the answering machine had just clicked off. Someone left a message. And I'm like, okay, so who's this? I click. And, hey, Jack, it's Clive Cussler. Do you mind giving me a call? I'm like, so I called him right away. I said, Clive, it's like, I knew his sense of humor. I said, Clive, it's Jack DuBrul. I was monitoring my calls and you didn't make the cut. I'm sorry. He goes, not skipping a beat. He goes, I get that a lot. But we started just chit-chatting about some stuff. And he says, Jack, are you familiar with the Organ Files with Craig Durgo? And I said, yeah, I'd read it. He says, well, Craig's done another one, but he doesn't want to write a third. Would you be interested? And I couldn't say yes fast enough. I mean, I was just honored, thrilled to death. So he said, well, we talked about it a little bit. They sent me an advanced reader's copy of the second book, Sacred Stones. And then I came up with my own plot using these characters. Did a few sample chapters, and Clive had me come out to his house in Arizona, and we talked about it. He said, liked what I'd written. He liked my writing style. He'd done a blurb for me years earlier. He said, but the one thing I don't like about his books, it's nuclear smuggling, and that's been done to death. So I want you to come up with something different. I'm going to take a nap for about an hour, have it ready when I get back. So that's my Clive Cussler, how I get to work with him story.
Well, Clive always read, works by authors that he was interested in having. Graham, in fact, had 2 little paperbacks that he had written for Bantam, and so I read them and I thought, okay. So I took them over to Clive and plunked them down in front of him and said,
"Oh, was that you're doing?"
Yeah.
Oh, good
me.
call.
Yeah.
I had read Graham's books. I just reread them. Yeah.
I really liked them, but you could just tell that he was the guy that was going to be.
Yeah.
Excuse me, that he was going to be at home in.
He's done more Cussler books than any of us.
Yeah, he has.
Yeah.
He has. But he had fewer books of his own.
That's true.
I think then.
Yeah, you're right.
And did any of you read Boyd Morrison's medieval book?
I just finished it.
Let me tell you what, it's absolutely great. It's a Clive Cussler in medieval Europe. I mean, and his sister is a famous, a well-respected, I won't say famous, medieval scholar. She's the head of medieval manuscripts or something at the Getty Museum. I mean, she's a really serious medievalist. And she and Boyd had wanted to write a book together, but when they sent me the manuscript, in its early stages and all, when I read it, I just cracked up. But I called Boyd and I said, "It's Clive." It's Clive at Mont Saint Michel. The whole bit. And
dirt pit and armor is what it is.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think Clive would have loved it. I was sad that he didn't get to read it because he was somewhat. Well, there was some skepticism about, whether Boyd was going to seriously write a medieval mystery. But
I think there's a sequel coming out, isn't there?
Yeah. No, it's had wonderful reviews. I mean, we did an event for Boyd and his sister, and I really, really liked it.
Yeah, I do too. I agree.
Yep. But I thought when I finished it, I thought Clive would really have liked this, and he would have seen himself, his imprint on Boyd is so if you haven't read it and you're looking for another Cussler, I can truly recommend it to you because it doesn't really matter that it is
The Lawless Land, I think the title is.
As soon as you start reading it, you think, okay, we're off on another Cussler adventure, and all the right stuff is there. I was really pleased with it. And yes, they are writing a sequel.
Good.
So, anybody else have a question they'd like to ask? Come on, guys.
Jack got a hold of that. Then the guy would be Dirk's however many Greek.
Yeah, there you go.
Interesting.
Sir Pitt.
Right. So, knowing that there was a certain, what do I want to call it, structure to Clive's books, do you, when Robert Parker died and various people have taken over writing the Spencer novels and the other novels, they have moved them into more of because Spencer was a Korean War veteran, right? And now he's still working out at the gym and doing all this great stuff. He's moved up he's practically past the Iraq War. He's probably now but anyway, there has been some modernizing and changes and all. So how would you all feel if the Cussler books changed somewhat from the standard Cussler formula? Are you okay with that? You want it to be always the same as it was? What's your thought?
People try to go off like that and they screw it all up.
Yeah.
People do a really good job. So they do a really good job. Good.
That's right. She just said it. If it's not broke,
Don't fix it. Well, see, that was what happened with me and the Saboteurs. Is because I did kind of flipped everything on its head when I did Titanic Secret. I went to Clive and said, "Look, I want to do something a little bit different with this, and more like an Agatha Christie type story than a Arthur Conan Doyle." And Clive really liked that idea, and so we're working together. We got about 2/3 of the way through the book when he passed away, And so when I turn it over to Dirk, Dirk's like, no. We want the formula. We got to get it back. Dude, it was a lot of changes. So I think Clive was open to shake it up a little bit.
Clive was open to
anything,
almost anything.
Yeah.
He really was. I mean, I'm just a little bit younger than Clive when he died, but I can remember thinking, how great it was that in his 80s,
yeah,
that he was constantly willing to change and do things differently. And I don't know.
Again, as long as it was entertaining, that was his big
all.
thing.
What he really cared about was if the pages moved fast and if the audience was entertained. I guess my position would be I would hate to see it become static, if it, and that's always a danger, I think, when you try to keep things the same, because the real question is, what would Clive do?
Right.
Would Clive have, in fact, shaken it up and done some different things? And of course, we won't know that. We don't. But in these other universes, the Ludlum is coming back. The Clancys have continued, and now who is it? There's I'm going blank here. There's somebody else's world that is coming back to life again. Another of the really amazing.
Well, I know Wilbur Smith has some co-writers now that since he passed away.
Yeah, Wilbur Smith is one, and the Griffith, W.E.B.
Oh yeah, Bill
Griffith is another one, but it's somebody older than that, and I just can't. I'm sorry, it's a senior moment on my part. But anyway, I think that's always a question: is it going to be exactly the same, or if you're going to? Robert Ludlum wrote what in the 80s, I think.
Mostly, yeah. Late
So
70s,
how how's that going to play in 2022? And I did a really interesting event today. You all might be interested. A British woman who's a scientist, and so she loves applying science to authors' works, and she's written this terrific book about all the tech and the science in the James Bond books. And it's publishing now because 60 years ago was when Dr. No first published. And she structured the book to go chronologically.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, 25 films and the whole bit. And it was really fascinating to talk to her about, how really terrible Dr. No was. I mean, it was low budget, and what was she said, the dragon car or whatever, was super tacky, and could you really live in a volcano and all the rest of it. But the point is that the Bond stuff just kept evolving, and the last Daniel Craig, obviously we hit a wall there, and I don't know how that will continue. But a whole part of the conversation was the constant evolution of the films, not the books so much, because there are only 14 books, but there are 25 movies. So there wasn't a ton of source material for the movies. They had to make up the movie stuff as they moved along, and how things kept changing. Could you really paint somebody with gold paint, credibly today, or how would that work? The Goldfinger thing, and it was really a fascinating conversation to think about if you're taking something like Bond.
Yeah.
And even the Sherlock Holmes stuff, it keeps evolving all the time. There are people writing, and right now Agatha Christie is having this huge moment. And there's a terrific book here in the store called Marple, in which a number of contemporary authors have written an Agatha Christie. And
Miss Marple story.
Val McDermott. Yeah, they're all Miss Marples, obviously. Sorry, that was Val McDermott wrote like the second murder at the vicarage as opposed to the first, and so it was really interesting to see a sort of Christie update without really losing, the whole Miss Marple ethos and the whole bit. Yeah, no, I love it. It's a really terrific book. I mean, if you've never read Christie, it's fun to read. So Clive never wrote. Did he write short stories? I know he wrote the nonfiction with Craig about the
Sea Hunters. Yeah, he did. There were little
Sea Hunters 1 and 2.
There were.
But did he write
bits of fiction in those? He did a fiction write-up of John F. Kennedy on the PT-109.
Okay.
And how it, the boat crashed, and then it had the nonfiction part of when he went looking for it. So he had, he did wrote a short story about the Hunley and the men that died aboard it. So that'd be about his only way of saying he did any short stories. But like an anthology like that, no, never.
No, but I don't know that the estate would ever like commission 10 years from now or 20 years from now, would a bunch of contemporary authors write a Clive Cussler story?
Maybe.
I don't know. I mean, it's just an interesting thought. The estate, after all, can do pretty much what it wants to, and be kind of curious to see as it passes along through generations.
I haven't really talked to Dirk about it, but I know Clive was dead set against Hollywood.
Oh, yeah.
But
Lord, I'll say.
Yeah.
He just went, he would go nuclear if you even mentioned
he was well
movie.
burned by them.
No, we did not discuss movies.
But I think, now with streaming services and like a 9-part or 10-part story arc, they could do wonders for the Dirk Pitt books. I mean, that's the way. It's like, the Netflix Reacher story I thought was absolutely fantastic. And, followed along the book very well, told the story at the pace it should have been told, kept all the details it should have kept in there. That's the way to tell when a Clive Cussler story on film. So I don't know if Dirk's open to it or not. I hope he is. I'd love to see it.
I don't know. I've never asked him. It's not a question I've ever wanted to bring up.
Yeah, right.
Scary question there. I know. Dirk, if you're watching, here's your chance. You say so. So, anybody else have anything they'd like to ask or contribute? Okay. Okay.
Yes.
So what's it like to build in a world that is already created for you?
So the question is, what is it like to build in a world that's already been created for you, which is sort of what we're talking about, but not quite as specific.
It's a challenge, but it's a fun challenge. And when I say that, it's the world of 1915 is very familiar to us in a lot of ways, but also very foreign in a lot of ways. So it's finding what slang words were popular. Mm-hmm. It's always driven me crazy when you've got a say a book set in 1600. They use the word thug. Well, thug is actually short for thuggee, which is an Indian cult from the late 1700s.
Right.
So the little things like that. So staying within the parameters of what that world is. But it's also fun to discover things that we think are a lot more modern. For example, the D-cell battery was around in 1915. Same as we have today. So it's finding those little tiny things that that pinpoint that moment in time, I guess, and not getting the stuff wrong.
Right.
Which is always the hard thing, especially a lot of the transportation stuff. I mean, there are a lot of people out there that know a lot about cars and trains and planes. And if you get any of those details wrong, they're going to fall out of the story, and they're not going to believe you anymore. And they're going to put the book away, and that's the end of it. So you have to get all that right. So, I mean, it's tough because you do the world building, but you can't screw it up because it is a real world, and there are people out there that know a lot more about it than you do. So that's and those are the people I played to. So I spent, the Devil's Island thing, to get from one island to the other island, the rip current was so bad, they built an overhead tram. Just a little box. What I could never find is, did it have a motor or did you pull it by hand? So I was like, all right, Jack, I mean, no one cares about this detail, but that one guy out there that knows that it was a motor or a hand. I went hand thing. I got a 50-50 shot. Right. If I get it wrong, sir, I am so sorry. I wish I could find you.
And there's some stuff you really take for granted. For example, you could say, guy's got a headache, he would take an aspirin. Yeah. But in fact, aspirin wasn't invented until 1922. So, that's the kind of weird thing.
Yep.
I remember an historical novelist who wrote a book in the 11th century, and it had to do with, at some point, the women were using spindles to do weaving or something. Somebody actually wrote and said it was the wrong spindle. It was like, seriously? He told me that story, and it was like, who knew? And actually, who cares, but...
That one person out there that knows it.
The wrong spindle.
Right.
It's a Paul Doherty book, Patrick, and it was just so funny. Yeah. So do you have any questions that you want to relay?
Differences between writing the Oregon Files and Isaac Bell. Is one series harder than another?
Okay, so Aaron would like to know if the difference between writing the Oregon Files and Isaac Bell was one harder than another.
I wouldn't say harder. They're completely different. And again, it's because of the history. With the Oregon File series, it's contemporary, so there's no history I have to worry about. I can just let my mind run free. I can come up with any kind of terrorist plot I want to have. I can have any kind of crazy technology I want to throw out there. It makes it a lot easier. But also with the Isaac Bell, it's kind of comforting. I don't have to worry about all that. I have to keep this close to the way the history has been written. At least that's important to me. In terms of character, I've only done 3 books with Bell so far. So right now, I'm still much more comfortable writing Juan Cabrillo. I feel I have a better handle on who he is. When I took over the series, Craig Durga really hadn't fleshed him out that much, so I felt I kind of made him mine. But Justin had done so many of the Isaac Bell books that I have to keep the character close to what he had created. But I told Clive, I'm not a mystery writer. I'm a thriller writer. So there's going to be a lot more daring do type stuff. He goes, I have no problem with that whatsoever. So I mean, I've seen some people say that, well, it's not really the Isaac Bell from before, and it probably isn't.
Well, that's true. He's a detective, isn't he?
Yeah.
For the Van Dorn Detective Agency.
Right.
Or, so right away, he's different than, if he's working for Numa.
Right, exactly. So I wouldn't say that one's more difficult than the other. They both have their ups and their downs.
But you also had Clive when you were writing to Oregon, and that makes a difference.
Graham was, Graham Brown and I talk about that. You're getting like a jam, you call Clive, and you're like, Clive, I'm into this, wrote myself into a corner. Jack, this is what you have to do right here. It's like, why didn't I think of that? So maybe that was awfully nice to have him as a backstop.
It was. I've often thought that one of the interesting things about Clive was that he could let other people write in his universe, and he didn't smother them. I mean, every author we've ever talked to that's written for Clive has never said, that Clive breathed heavily on them or, throttled them back or something. And I think, I can still remember after Trojan Odyssey going out to dinner with him, and he said to me, I can't do this much heavy lifting anymore. He said, what would you think about my, asking somebody else to write in my universe? And I really thought about that, and I'm trying to remember, does anybody remember when that book published? How old was he when that? He must have been maybe 70?
70-something, yeah.
Well, but not a lot more, because the other authors began to come in, and I can't quite remember when Graham wrote the first one and Dirk whatever. I don't remember the
Dirk's
the
first
chronology of it. But
the first one was Paul Compricos.
Yes, it was. Yeah,
with Blue Gold.
Yeah.
Oh God, that would have been
long time back.
Yeah. Serpent, you're right.
Right.
Blue Gold is
but then he he got more and more open to it, and he got interested in setting up things for other authors to write.
To write one.
Yeah, he still stayed involved, and but it was really in many ways more in an editorial capacity or concept.
Yeah.
He was like the idea guy, and then the editor guy. But I've always thought, how wonderful it was that he was able to do that and then let people, write.
Yeah.
Really
brave on his part.
Yeah, well, he was a really generous guy to other authors. He was a wonderful mentor. I think. There are many things about him to love, and that was certainly one of them.
Of course, making talk with Boyd and Graham and myself. We were all acolytes. We all read the Cussler books, and wanted to write in that style.
Yeah.
So it was kind of fitting for us to step into that role.
Yeah. Anything else, Patrick? Was that it? Okay. Yes. Oh, the hardest question of all.
I don't know. The short answer. I'll give you some truth. I did have a plot ready to go. I was getting ready to write it. This would be my next project when Clive got back in touch with me to do the Isaac Bell books. I do have the second book of a 2-book deal for that. So there is a plot. There is a publisher ready to go for it, but It might be a while. I mean, I really enjoy doing these books, and I'll be perfectly candid. I get paid a lot more for doing these books than I ever did for Mercer.
Yeah.
But
it's a steady paycheck.
yes, it's a steady paycheck. But I mean, the cool thing, and I'm blessed by this, is the Lightning Stones actually earned out the full advance for both books, which unprecedented, really, I think. So it kind of takes the pressure off me a little bit. So I will be able to get it done, but I don't know when. Tell Dirk to fire me. Yep. There you go. One book. I actually approached Clive years ago about doing, all these series, all these books on one plot. So to have,
Oh, yeah?
Isaac Bell discover something, or he's the historic part of it, and then the Numa Files guy takes over, and then the Fargos are part of the adventure, and then finally it would culminate. This 5-book run would culminate with Dirk Pitt saving the day at the end. And Clive goes, "Yeah, it's too complex. Don't do that." So as on a lark, Boyd and Graham, when they did Organ Files and the Numa Files, actually had a scene where the characters from both books were in the same spot at the same time. And I think it was in a warehouse in Malta. And they said to coordinate that took them months. And just to get the timing right, the whole 9 yards. And they go, if that little bit took that long, I'm glad we never ran with that other idea. Forget it.
That would be extremely complicated. No
But
kidding.
one more, but it was, and I'm also very grateful for Clive. I don't know if you ever knew, but Clive did let me put Mercer in one of the Organ Files books, just on a lark.
Great. Well, we're done. Nobody has anything else they want to add? No?
All right.
Well, in that case, Jack, thank you so much for
No,
coming
Barbara,
out here. It
thank
was
you.
wonderful of you to travel this far, especially in a holiday week, to see us. So thank you all very much for coming tonight. Thank you, virtual audience, for joining us. These interviews stay up on our Facebook and YouTube pages forever, so other Cussler fans who couldn't make it would like to come. What's going on with the Cussler conference and so forth? You are good, wonderful. So I'm glad you're keeping it going. Yeah. All right.
Great group of people. Right? Exactly.
And the museum is Terry's still running the museum up there, isn't she? So do you get to actually have things at the car museum when you're in Denver, or where do you do it? Oh, that's nice. Great. I'm sure it is, but you've gone to numerous places. Haven't you been to Charleston? And where all have you been? Okay. Yeah, I went.
Vegas a couple times. Yep.
Didn't we have one here in 2019, right in October before the pandemic? Because I remember Dirk and his sisters were there. Yeah. Actually, I talked, didn't I? I forgot. Yes, I had. There I was. Right, and I gave you the photos, didn't I? Because that was that was a compilation of photos for Clive's 80th birthday.
Oh, really?
Yes,
Oh,
then
nice.
Dirk and Janet and all ran into the family archives. It was a really nice. We did that at the Biltmore, and we showed
Okay.
it all on a big screen and everything.
Oh.
It was really cool.
That's
But,
one time I miss it.
It reminds you that Clive actually did so many of the things that he wrote about. I was a conversation today. We were talking about Daniel Craig and how brutal it was, for him to do so many of the James Bond
Right.
stunts, and that's why he's retired. But Clive actually, did. I wanted to say, Clive actually did a lot of his own stuff too, or not necessarily in the books,
Yeah.
but he was writing in part from
From his own
experience.
experiences.
Yeah.
It humbled me when I went to the first International Thriller Writers Conference. And I'm starting to talk to them, these folks, and so what's your background? I was a CIA case officer for 12 years.
Right.
I was part of a hostage rescue team, or I worked as a SWAT sniper. And I'm like, I was an educated bartender. That's what all I got going for me.
It really is interesting, the credentials.
Yeah.
Now it seems like you can have a military career and then retire and write. Don Bentley's
Yeah.
like that. Jack Carr's
Yeah, a
like
bunch of
that.
them.
A whole bunch of those guys are, there's another one writing in, I can't think of his name at the moment, but anyway, there's at least 5 of them I
Yeah.
can think of that our retired military.
Right, what you know is why I created my character Harry White, the drunk. I know him.
You know, Mark Cameron is the U.S. Marshal and all. He's one of the people writing the Clancy's, and you know, So there's a lot of authenticity, so to speak, and all of that, which is great. So, do you want to get your book signed? Jack could just stay right here. Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.